So it has personal consequences, right? All of those things have personal consequences to us. We put our relationships at risk. We put our finances at risk. We put our bodies at risk. But it also has cultural consequences because we're all, each one of us, part of this culture. This culture reinforces this attitude and we play a part in it. Meanwhile, the whole society is walking around with not an open heart, but an empty heart, trying to fill it with goods and activities that don't quite do the trick. And so we're all frustrated and disappointed and irritated because our activities are not producing what we most yearn for. So we see people walking around angry. We see people with tripwires that are strung tightly and in multitudes. There's nothing in the center, nothing to hold on to but the wild elephant, which is now constantly irritable, depressed, easily distracted, and enraged. And we don't know how to deal with it. We don't know how to talk to it, much less control it. In that situation, our base instincts often take over, or the elephant in this case is our base instincts often take over, impulses take over, and most of us walk around sort of in the field of reactivity, right? We've been talking about this quite a bit. I think it's a very important thing to get our heads wrapped around. We walk around in the field of reactivity, where fear is the currency. And so we snap at the people that we love. They may not be behaving the way we want, but that is about our wanting as much as it is about their behavior. And getting angry rarely solves that problem anyway. So we snap at the people that we love. We put our bodies at risk. We put our relationships at risk. And on a culturally symbolic instance of this is the shooting of a man fleeing from a police officer, shooting him in the back. That is a reactive police officer whose elephant is wildly out of control. And I don't think we've seen that this is not an isolated incident, right? This is taking place all over the country now. And certainly it is, racism plays a huge part in setting off the elephant, but it's the elephant that needs to be controlled, or at least, I don't know if we can control that elephant, but understood and made peace with. So this has huge consequences. Our culture has huge consequences for our personal lives, and the consumerist culture has consequences as a society as a whole as well, and we are living in them right now. But it does not have to be that way. We have the tools to fix this issue or address this issue. And in fact, our tradition has the answer. Unitarian Universalism, the tradition famous for asking questions. So much so that some people propose that our symbol be not the chalice, but a question mark. We have the answer. That's, in one way, that's sort of Unitarian Universalist heresy to say that we have an answer. And we're not the only tradition with an answer, and our answer is probably not the only answer, but it's the answer that speaks to us. It is in our vocabulary, so we can understand it and feel comfortable operating in it. And the answer, as far as I read it, is our first and last principle. Dignity, inherent dignity, and interconnectivity. So the inherent dignity comes, of course, from universal salvation, right? It's on that trajectory. From the universalist side of our heritage, we get universal salvation, which over time has evolved into the inherent dignity of all people. So we have universal salvation inherent in every person, and all those persons are interconnected, interdependent in the matrix of existence. And this calls us into compassion and care for one another, and compassion and care for ourselves. So how does our Unitarian Universalist story bear witness to the notion that we are all interconnected, that everything is interconnected, and that we, each of us, are bestowed with inherent dignity? This story, these first and last principles, this is our faith. The interconnectedness of all being, I'm not a physicist, it might be provable, but the inherent dignity of all people is not provable. So we take that on faith, and I think we take both of them on faith. And faith is a story that guides our ability to respond, which is where we find freedom. Freedom is found in our ability to respond rather than react. It is shaped by our faith, by that story. And this allows us to experience a sense of fearlessness in our faith. Salvation, using that old word, is the freedom of living without fear. And we all have this ability. We are all offered this promise. Your inherent dignity is your center. Your inherent dignity is your center. And it was given gracefully. It was not earned. It is there. It is ours to uncover and develop. Our inherent dignity is our center, not our emotionality, our reactivity, not our binge eating or our compulsive buying, not our instant anger or addictive behavior, not envy or worry or self-righteousness. Dignity, inherently given, not contingent on you. That's our center. The responsibility that we inherit along with our dignity is that interconnected existence. So inherent dignity is the solution that our faith provides us with to counter that sense of the empty center that our culture disposes us with. That empty, vacuous, and eventually violent soul of consumer culture. Our antidote is our faith in our inherent dignity and our interconnection with one another in all existence. But there's an issue. We have the solution. We have the answer to the problem. But do we have the equation to get to the solution? I could tell you that you have inherent worth and dignity all day long. But how do we as people go about truly discovering and developing that? So I think that's what that first and last principle encourage us to do. Return to the home of our soul. Again, more easier said than done. I want to go through the litany of salvation that I'm developing with you, because it factors in and is produced by these two cornerstones of our tradition. The universal salvation, the inherent dignity of every person, has caused me to investigate the word salvation, spend some time with it, and out of that has descended something that I'm working with and evolving, and hopefully it's useful. So salvation, and if it still troubles you to use that word, you may replace it with the phrase something like realizing your grace-given dignity. So if you don't want to use salvation, you have to use a whole lot of other words. I will stick with salvation. Is the freedom of living without fear. Freedom, then, is demonstrated in our ability to respond rather than react. Fearlessness comes from faith. Faith is a deep story whose function is to guide our ability to respond. And that's where we find freedom, in our ability to respond. And our Unitarian Universalist story bears witness to the notion that we are all interconnected, that everything is interconnected, and that we, each of us, are bestowed with inherent, grace-given dignity and worth. So that's our story. That is our faith. And that faith can guide our response and guide us out of reactivity. But just proclaiming that dignity is inherent isn't the end of the story. There are many things that are inherent, yet still require us to develop them in order for them to maximize their potential, right? And all of these things take practice for us to develop. We can say, and it can be a very saving message to say to somebody, you have inherent worth and dignity, period. You were born with it, it's in you, and you don't need to work to attain it. That by itself is a saving thing to say to somebody, right? But I also think that we do need to work to develop it, as though it were a muscle. We're born with muscles, but we need to work to develop them, right? So I believe that our faith requires practice. I believe that all faith requires practice. And our story, connecting to our own inherent worth, that place within us that is enough, that place that subverts consumerism and ego and fear, that takes practice. So let me go back. I said a moment ago that inherent worth was like a muscle, you could develop it. I think getting to it requires a muscle. I think the inherent worth is a nugget that just is all by itself. It doesn't need developing. But we cover it up, and it gets covered, whether we want it to or not. So what the practice that we engage in is the practice of uncovering it. Okay? So we have the answer, right? Dignity and connectivity. What we need are practices. And you guys come every Sunday. Well, most every Sunday. Sometimes you come. You're here today. And that is a start. But seriously, the community ritual of Sunday services, that is a practice. That all by itself is a practice. And it is the gateway practice of our faith. So what's the rest of the equation, though? Because I actually think it's there, it's embedded in our tradition, but it's not readily celebrated. It's not obvious. And so if we look close enough, maybe there's something there that we can recognize, put together, and work with. An actual path, a practice. All right? So I'm going to read you a quote just about practice, and this is from the Christian perspective, so some of you might have to do a little translating. This is from a professor of theology at Duke Divinity School by the name of Craig Dykstra. And again, this is about Christian practices. He says, Christian practices are not activities we do to make something spiritual happen in our lives, nor are they duties we undertake to be obedient to God. Rather, they are patterns of communal action that create openings in our lives where the grace, mercy, and presence of God may be known to us. They are places where the power of God is experienced. And ultimately, practices add up to a way of life. So some of you will have to replace God with another term. But the idea is that engaging in practices in a Unitarian Universalist context, we're not necessarily expecting to see God or the interconnectedness of everything the first time we sit down to meditate. We're actually creating a set of practices that wind up adding up to a way of life. And those practices are already existent in Unitarian Universalism, and we have delineated them and put them into a kind of format in the group that we are calling firewalkers. Firewalkers as in the fire of commitment. Our hymn, the fire of commitment, because practice takes commitment. Right? So firewalkers comes from the fire of commitment. And basically, this is where the title of today's sermon comes from, and it is open hand, full heart, right? And that's because there are 5 elements to, it's just a mnemonic, something that we can help us remember by. There are 5 elements to the firewalkers, 5 elements to this set of practices that might add up to a way of life, right? And I have 5 fingers anyway, so this helps me remember. And there's also a little acronym, CUPS, C, P, P, S, S. The UU is implied. So that is co-creation. We're in this together. We're in this together. Then practices, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. These are specifically contemplative practices. Stewardship. Did I get the other P? No, participation. Participation. So this is a place where you are served by the church. A lot of times in our initial meetings, I'll ask firewalkers, where is the church really feeding you? Where do you just come to feel good? And they go, So, you need a place to come to church just to feel good, to get fed, be it in choir, spiritual poetry group, some social activities. Be fed. That's participation. Stewardship is one of the S's, vital to the life of this church, which is vital to the life of somebody who may need this church to be here. And also an exercise in generosity, which is clearly a spiritual discipline. And the other S is service. Where do you serve this church? Do you serve it as a buildings and grounds chair or committee person? Do you serve it in a justice capacity? Where do you serve this church? And together, did I name all 5? Did I get 5? These 5 things create a way of life. They create a way of life. And the open hand has some other symbolic, meaning to it too. It has a sense of openness to it, right? A sense of vulnerability. And openness and vulnerability are key to the Firewalker endeavor, because along with commitment, we are committed to this path, but we also have a sense that we don't know what we're doing. There's an openness and an exploration that unfolds in the Firewalker group. And we're not holding ourselves to standards but rather holding ourselves in care. So that's very important. So there's another little trick here. By paying attention to what is inherent in our church lives, which is these 5 things, they're inherent, but oftentimes not connected. So we are taking what is inherent and understanding that they're connected. That has reflections in our principles, right? Our inherent worth and our interconnectivity. And the truth is that many of us do, even all 5 of these things already, but we don't realize that they are connected. And so just by recognizing that, I think that we have begun to create a way of life, or to see our participation in church as a set of practices that help us build a way of life. So I do want to talk about practice just very quickly, because this is a part that when we get together as a group of firewalkers, we talk about our contemplative practice probably more than the other aspects. We like to highlight the other aspects, but the contemplative part it's just fun. It's just fun to talk about. And what I want to make clear is that we're not jumping. Commitment does not mean jumping into the deep end. It does not mean that, and by jumping into the deep end, you're not going to hear hosannas when you first commit to the practice. We're interested in people who are wading into the water, because those people will stay. The people who tend to jump into the deep end, I think there is an element of consumerist culture in that moment. You want the goods, you want the high, you want the spiritual epiphany and experience. And that's not what it's about. It's about a way of life. Those may come, but it is more important to wade in and acclimate and adjust and have it be a way of life rather than a single one-off experience. So the hope is that by having these things become a way of life, by connecting our stewardship to our meditation, by connecting our practice to our service, by interconnecting all of these things, we develop a sense of assurance about our faith tradition and even about ourselves. And that assurance begins to work on us. Now we are not only telling the faith story, we are developing the faith story in our own lives. We are practicing our faith story. And that faith story, if you remember the litany of salvation, I guess that's what I'm calling it, the faith story is what guides our response, takes us out of reactivity. So, in one way, this, yes, is a bold-faced pitch to invite you all to join the firewalkers. There are flyers in the flyer rack. And the first step, you don't even need a flyer. You can just email me and say, "What were you talking about on Sunday?" And then you're trapped. Just email me and we'll have a conversation. Or you could ask, could I ask the firewalkers that are in the room just to stand up for a moment? So when we first launched the program, I would have been happy with 5. I think we have 18 people in the program right now. And is it pretty good? So far, so good? Yes, good. Thank you. Like you're going to say no, I guess. Not really. It's not working for me. It doesn't work for everybody, probably, right? But the meetings are really fine. They're very fine. And I would encourage you to make an appointment with me, and we'll get started on that. So that's the bold-faced pitch for the Firewalker program. But beyond that, I just want to drive home the point, I guess, that it's bigger than the Firewalker program. You are coming to church on Saturdays, and that's part of the practice for you. Sundays. You guys haven't been coming on Saturdays, right? We have so much fun. Next week, come on Saturday. You'll see. Tell me how it goes. I don't even know what I was saying anymore. You come on Sundays. We come on Sundays. It's part of our practice. And that, in and of itself, is a step. And let it be a step. Let it be as you leave here today and as you come here next Sunday, be aware that you are engaging in a communal, spiritual practice that works with the faith story that we tell, so that your intention can set you up to be here and can carry you back out into the world and help to curb that reactivity, because the stories that we tell ourselves are where we find our ability to respond rather than react. And send me an email. See, in Firewalkers, we seek to not only affirm, but actually get in touch with and develop our sense of our inherent worth and interconnectivity. In church, on Sundays, we do the same things, and that means we practice not looking outside ourselves for fulfillment, but looking inside. Thus, we subvert the consumerist culture. Coming to church is a subversive act. We court qualities here of generosity, of ethics, of wisdom and courageous effort, of truthfulness, patience, and resolve, compassion and loving kindness. Let our story lead us into those. And when that begins to happen, we will find ourselves with the assurance of salvation, or whatever set of words you want to replace that with. We have the assurance of salvation, an interconnected and inherent dignity at our very core. With that assurance, we will walk in the light of truth and in the light of God.